The kind of quiet that blanketed Jake's farm on a spring morning wasn't something you could buy. It had to be earned, through years of sunrise chores, broken fences, mud-caked poots, and a rhythm of life that followed the land itself. There was no traffic, no honking, no city clamor, just the occasional low moo from the pasture and the soft rustle of wind sweeping through the tall grass. Jake stood on his creaky front porch with a chipped mug of coffee, watching as the morning mist curled along the hills like a ghost too lazy to leave. The sky was still streaked with hues of lavender and peach, and his cows, 6 big, lumbering sweethearts, moved slowly across the field like living clouds. Peaceful, predictable, home. And then he heard it, the crunch of tires on gravel. Jake stiffened. Visitors were rare out here, especially unannounced ones. He stepped off the porch and turned toward the long dirt drive just as a gleaming white SUV rolled up, kicking dust into the air like a warning signal. The engine idled too long before shutting off. Out stepped a woman who didn't look like she belonged within 10 miles of cow country. Tall stilettos sank into the dirt. Her hair was pulled into a perfectly engineered bun, her lips painted a sharp red that matched her blazer. A pair of oversized designer sunglasses hid most of her face, but her nose tilted up with the air of someone who'd never heard no in her life. Jake wiped his hand on his jeans and met her halfway. "You lost." "Nope," she said crisply. "You're Jake, right? I'm Karen. We're sort of neighbors. I live 2 roads down, big white house with the columns. You've probably seen it." Jake hadn't, nor had he cared to. Karen didn't wait for small talk. She flicked open a leather-bound planner, flipped a page, and smiled, tight and toothy. "So here's the deal. My daughter is getting married next weekend. We're going all out. Lace, live music, champagne towers, the whole fairy tale." She paused, looking around his property with the gleam of a realtor eyeing a prime listing. "And your yard? It's perfect. Rolling hills, rustic charm, cows for ambience. It's like a Pinterest board exploded out here." Jake blinked. "You want to rent my land?" "Oh, no." She waved him off with a sharp laugh. "Not rent. We just figured we'd set up here for the ceremony. Just the ceremony. 2 hours, max. No big deal." She clapped her hands once. "You won't even notice we're here." He stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It never came. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "this is my home. I've got livestock, electric fences, irrigation lines." Karen's smile vanished so fast it felt like a trapdoor opened under it. "Are you saying no?" "I'm saying this isn't a venue." Karen inhaled sharply, tilting her head. "It's just a field, Jake. You barely use this space. It would be selfish to let it go to waste when it could bring someone so much joy. You want to be neighborly, don't you?" Jake's jaw tightened. "No." Karen's eyes narrowed behind those designer shades, her fingers tightening around her planner like she might swat him with it. Then, as quickly as she'd come, she spun on her heel and stomped back to the SUV. As the vehicle sped away, dust curling behind it like smoke from a fuse, Jake watched her disappear over the hill. The cows stood silently behind the fence, their massive heads turned toward him in perfect eerie unison, like they knew something he didn't. Jake sipped his coffee again. Something was coming, and it smelled like perfume, entitlement, and trouble. Jake wasn't a man who rattled easily, but something about Karen's retreating SUV unsettled him more than a tornado warning at midnight. That night, he triple-checked the locks, set out extra feed for the cows, and convinced himself she'd gotten the message. She was the kind of woman used to getting her way, sure, but even Karen wouldn't be bold enough to trespass. He underestimated her. By the time the roosters crowed 3 mornings later, Jake was already half-dressed and heading to the barn with a hay fork slung over his shoulder. But as he opened the back door, he stopped cold. The sound hit first. Voices, dozens, maybe more. Then, the pounding, metal clanging, hammers striking stakes, the dull whine of a portable generator humming in the wind. Jake stepped out, his boots crunching over dry leaves as he rounded the corner of his house, and froze. His pasture, his land, was gone. In its place stood a nightmare in white and gold. Massive tents flapped in the morning breeze. Rows of folding chairs lined the field like teeth in a monster's mouth. Floral arches, speakers, camera rigs, even a portable bar being stocked with top-shelf liquor. People bustled everywhere, hauling in crates, wiring up string lights, pinning down napkins with mason jars. His fence was broken. His grass was crushed. His cows were wide-eyed, huddled at the far end of the pasture behind a barricade of folding tables like confused villagers under siege. Jake stormed toward the chaos, steam practically rising from his skin. "Hey!" A man in a headset turned, then waved vaguely toward the center of the operation. "Talk to the boss lady." Jake pushed through a sea of hired help and floral assistants until he spotted the familiar flash of a red blazer. Karen, standing tall in the middle of it all, directing the madness like some kind of unhinged wedding general. She didn't even look surprised when she saw him. "Oh, there you are," she chirped, like they were old friends. "I meant to leave you a note." Jake was speechless for a half second, then found his voice. "What the hell is this?" Karen gave him that same too-sweet smile, tucking a clipboard under her arm. "I told you, we're using your yard for the wedding. You didn't say yes, but you didn't really say no. I figured you'd come around." He took a step closer. "You're trespassing. You broke my fence. You scared my livestock." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "It's just a bunch of cows. They'll survive a few hours of excitement. Besides, the guests love the farm vibe. It's whimsical chick." Jake's jaw tightened so hard it clicked. "Get off my property." Karen sighed and looked around theatrically. "Look, Jake, we're 2 hours in. Everything's rented. I've got a videographer flying in from Leh, and the bride's makeup artist is already setting up in your shed. It's happening. Don't be the bitter neighbor no one invites to anything." "Lady, I'll call the police." Karen leaned in, her voice dropping to a silken threat. "And I'll tell them you threatened my crew. And maybe, just maybe, I'll mention that rickety old fence of yours wasn't up to code. You want city inspectors poking around out here." Jake stared at her, stunned by the sheer audacity. Then, slowly, he stepped back, not in retreat, in calculation. He didn't say another word, just turned and walked away, past his cows, past the wrecked gate. But not before glancing at the latch that kept the pasture closed. One twist. That's all it would take. And Bessie, well, Bessie never did like strangers. Jake didn't go back inside. He sat on the edge of his porch instead, elbows on his knees, watching the circus unfold like a man who'd just discovered termites in his foundation. Only these weren't insects. They were decorators, caterers, and camera crews swarming over his land like they'd been born there. Every minute that passed, another slice of his peaceful life got carved up and swallowed by the wedding machine. Out in the field, a man balanced on a ladder, adjusting a chandelier hung from a tree that had survived lightning, drought, and decades of storms. But now, it was being zip-tied into Karen's idea of elegance. Jake could hear the hum of generators, the clatter of dishes being set, and worst of all, music. Pop music, with bass. His cows stood a few feet back from the tented chaos, staring. Their expressions were unreadable. But Jake knew the signs. They were tense, agitated. One of them, Bonnie, pawed at the dirt. That was never a good sign. Then came the clack of heels on his porch. Jake didn't look up right away. He already knew who it was. Karen plopped herself down beside him without asking. The air filled with the sharp sting of citrus perfume and conflict. "I knew you'd come around," she said cheerfully, fanning herself with a laminated itinerary. "I told the planners you'd warm up to the idea." Jake didn't respond. He just took a slow sip of his now cold coffee and stared straight ahead. Karen followed his gaze to the cows. They're kind of cute, you know. As long as they don't poop near the buffet, I think it'll add a little charm. Rustic meets kosher, maybe even make the bridal reel. Jake finally turned. You're still trespassing. Karen exhaled dramatically, like she was dealing with a stubborn child. Technically, maybe. But honestly, what's a little shared land among neighbors? Don't be so uptight. She looked at him out of the corner of her eye. You really don't want to be that guy. The old crank who lives out here all alone, scaring kids off his porch. Jake raised an eyebrow. You think I care what people think of me? Karen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I think you care more than you let on. And I think you know this isn't worth the trouble. She leaned in closer, her voice low and sweet, and laced with arsenic. You call the police. Great. But while they're here, maybe they notice your fencing is a bit patchy, or your shed's wiring isn't up to code. All it takes is one call to the county. Jake didn't flinch, but his knuckles whitened around the handle of his mug. And let's say this whole thing blows up. I've got connections. My brother-in-law works at the city council. My cousin's on the zoning board. She shrugged, mock innocently. Suddenly, permits get a little harder to renew. Farm inspections get more frequent. She patted his arm gently, like she was doing him a favor. Let us have the wedding, Jake. Everyone's happy. You get a quiet story to tell your cows. And in return, I don't make your life miserable. Jake stared at her for a long moment. The tension was thick enough to cut with a butter knife. Then he smiled. But it wasn't friendly. Karen took it as surrender, beaming as she stood. Knew you were smart. She clicked away down the steps, already barking orders into her phone. Jake watched her vanish behind the tent. Then, slowly, he stood. The cows followed his movement with curious eyes as he walked toward the gate. His boots were steady, deliberate. He reached the latch, paused. Then, click, lifted it. Jake had always believed that revenge was a dish best served cold. But Bessie preferred hers steaming, fresh, and right through the center of a wedding cake. The pasture gate creaked open with a long, metallic groan that sounded almost ceremonial. Jake stepped back, his face unreadable, as the cows stood just beyond the threshold, their heavy breath rising in plumes into the cool morning air. 6 of them. His girls, all muscle, curiosity, and raw bovine potential. Bessie, firstborn, broad-shouldered, and always one bad day away from demolishing something, lifted her big head and stared at Jake. He didn't say a word, just nodded. As if she'd been waiting for a sign, Bessie took a single step forward, then another. Behind her, the others followed, slow and deliberate. The grass bent beneath their weight. The tension was a rubber band pulled to its snapping point. Jake stood off to the side, arms folded, watching as the herd passed him. And then, in a low voice, he muttered, "Showtime." At the center of the yard, now fully transformed into a Pinterest fever dream, Karen stood with a tablet in hand, screeching into her Bluetooth earpiece. Where is the string quartet? I swear, if they don't show up in the next 10 minutes, I will personally burn down every violin in this county. A caterer dodged past her with a tray of deviled eggs. The bartender was setting up the signature drinks, lavender spritzers with edible glitter. Guests would start arriving in less than an hour, and Karen's control freak energy was vibrating at atomic levels. That's when the first moo rang out, long, low, and oddly thunderous. Karen's head snapped up. And then, like a scene out of a slow-motion horror film, she saw them. The cows, marching single file, right down the white-carpeted aisle. What the hell? Karen dropped her tablet, heels sinking deeper into the soft turf as she ran toward the oncoming stampede, arms flailing. Stop them. Someone stop them. The cows did not stop. Bessie, now fully in character, sidestepped a lantern, and headbutted a floral arch so hard it exploded into the air like confetti. The rest of the herd fanned out, hooves stomping tablecloths, noses dipping into centerpieces, tails smacking string lights. One knocked over a rack of wine glasses in a spectacular crash of crystal. A second cow found the 3-tier wedding cake on a decorative pedestal. And then, with terrifying grace, she leaned forward and took a giant, frosting-covered bite. Karen screamed like she was being murdered. "That cake is from France." Jake strolled up casually from the back, hands in his pockets. "Fancy cake," he mused. "Bit dry, though, according to Bessie." Karen spun around, eyes wild. "You let them out." Jake shrugged. "I figured if you wanted a farm wedding, might as well make it authentic." At that moment, one of the cows bumped into the champagne tower. The tower swayed. Time seemed to pause. Then, crash. 1,000 glass shards and 300 bubbles of overpriced champagne sparkled midair before raining down like judgment from above. Karen looked like she might faint or combust. Somewhere in the chaos, a man with a camera had started filming. The catering crew gave up trying to intervene. One DJ peeked out from behind a speaker, frozen in awe. And the cows. They were having the time of their lives. Rolling in the flower beds, nibbling on satin chair sashes. One sat, just sat, on a velvet lounge chair rented from an overpriced rustic decor company. Jake watched it all unfold with the satisfaction of a man who'd just pulled the pin on a grenade, handed it to a bully, and walked away smiling. And this was only the beginning. If Karen thought the worst was over, she clearly hadn't met her daughter. The rented shuttle, a sleek black van designed to ferry high-end guests across gravel roads like royalty, rolled to a stop at the top of the drive. Out stepped the bride, Madison, in all her dramatic glory. A mile of ivory satin trailed behind her like she was auditioning for a bridal magazine cover. Veil glittering, lips pursed, eyes narrowed behind oversized sunglasses. Behind her followed the groom, nervous, sweating, and clearly regretting everything. But Madison didn't notice him. Because at that very moment, Bessie, the queen of chaos, lifted her tail and pooped directly onto the aisle runner. Sentence case. "Is that a cow?" Madison shrieked. Karen sprinted across the lawn in full panic mode, flapping her arms like a broken windmill. "Madison, sweetheart, just don't look over there." But Madison was looking, and her scream was loud enough to rattle the light fixtures. My aisle smells like a barn." Jake, who had taken up position on his porch with a fresh cup of coffee and a lawn chair, gave a respectful nod toward the madness. "It is a barn," he murmured. The cows had officially claimed the venue. One lay sprawled under the gift table like a sunbathing diva. Another was chewing through a roll of ribbon garland. Bessie had taken a second swipe at the remnants of the French cake, frosting now smeared like war paint across her muzzle. Karen rushed to her daughter. "It's fine, baby, we'll move the ceremony over by the oak tree." Madison whirled on her. "We rehearsed by the arch. The lighting was perfect. You said nothing would ruin this day." Karen's eyes were wide and desperate. Jake let them out. "This is sabotage. I'll handle it, I swear." But it was already too late. The wedding planner appeared, face pale and clipboard trembling. "The photographer just quit. Said he's allergic to livestock and emotional breakdowns." "Oh, for the love off." Karen spun and pointed at Jake. This is all your fault." Jake calmly raised his mug. "You should have stayed on your side of the fence." The groom, still awkwardly hovering by the van, raised a timid hand. "Should we maybe reschedule?" Madison turned to him with murder in her eyes. "If you think I'm walking down that aisle again, through cow poop, no less, you can get married to the flower girl." He blinked. "We don't have a flower girl." "Exactly." That's when it happened. One of the cows, a troublemaker named Dolly, discovered the buffet table. With the grace of a wrecking ball in heels, She climbed halfway onto it and began plowing through trays of bruschetta, mini quiches, and shrimp cocktail like it was her last meal on earth. The entire table flipped. Shrimp rained. Glitter flew. Someone screamed. Karen, now on the verge of emotional collapse, stomped over to Jake's porch. "You're going to pay for this. Do you hear me? I'll sue you for everything you're worth. Property damage, emotional distress, wedding sabotage." Jake leaned back in his chair, eyes calm. "You trespassed. You never had permission. You touched my animals, destroyed my fence, and hijacked my land. Go ahead, call your lawyer. I'll be sure to have the footage ready." He gestured toward the corner of his porch, where a security camera sat blinking quietly. Karen paled. And in the background, Bessie mooed victoriously, still wearing a wedding veil she had stolen from a bridesmaid. The only thing louder than the mooing, sobbing, and screaming was the approaching siren. Karen's head jerked up like a hunted animal. Madison froze mid-tantrum, her dress torn, her veil half-eaten. The guests, those who hadn't already fled the scene, looked up from their scattered cocktail glasses, shielding their eyes from the flashing lights now slicing through the trees. A black and white sheriff's SUV rolled up the gravel path like a tank on parade. The door opened with a low creak, and out stepped Deputy Carla Brody, tall, broad-shouldered, and exuding the exhausted authority of someone who had seen way too much weirdness on this job. Jake stayed put on the porch, boots up, coffee still warm. He tipped his mug toward the cruiser like he'd been expecting them all morning. Karen, on the other hand, sprinted, or tried to. Her heels sank into the chewed-up, frosting-covered turf as she half-jogged, half-tripped her way toward the officer. "Thank God you're here," she screeched. "This man, this lunatic farmer, released his wild cows on my daughter's wedding. He sabotaged the whole thing. I want him arrested. Arrested." Deputy Brody squinted at her, one hand resting on her holster. "Ma'am, why are there cows wearing streamers?" Karen blinked. "They're not. That's not the point. This was a private event." Jake stood and finally made his way down from the porch, calm as a monk at a thunderstorm. "Afternoon, Carla." The deputy gave him a nod. "Jake." He handed her a USB stick. "What's this?" she asked. Jake's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Security footage. Every second of this circus. Karen breaking my fence, her crew hauling in tents without permission, and my personal favorite, her threatening to call in city inspectors if I didn't shut up and let her trespass. Oh, and there's audio." Karen's face lost every shade of color at once. "She's lying," she barked. "This is my land. Well, it's his, but I had plans. I even printed invitations." Deputy Brody raised an eyebrow. "Invitations don't override land deeds." Karen's lips curled like a feral cat. "He did this to ruin the wedding. He's dangerous." That's when Dolly trotted past, still chewing on a satin napkin, and promptly licked Karen's leg before smearing a wet snort across her sequin blazer. Deputy Brody chuckled. "I think," she said, "your poor planning doesn't equal criminal sabotage. But you know what does. Trespassing. Property damage. Intimidation. Interfering with livestock." Karen spun around, mouth open, looking for backup, but the guests were already backing away. Even Madison had dropped her bouquet and was now recording the whole thing on her phone. Face blank, but eyes gleaming with viral TikTok potential. The deputy clicked her pen and flipped open her notepad. "Why don't we start with full names and driver's license numbers for everyone involved in the setup crew?" Karen's jaw dropped. "You're siding with him." Jake took off his hat and mock bowed toward her. "It's the hat. Makes me look trustworthy." As the deputy took statements, the cows slowly returned to their pasture, led by Bessie, still dragging part of a tablecloth like a royal train. The sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the ruined tents and half-eaten decorations. Jake walked back toward the porch, past a disheveled Karen who was now shouting into her phone at a wedding planner who had already fled the property. He looked over his shoulder and said, "Next time you want a barn wedding, maybe ask the barn owner first." Karen growled. Bessie mooed. And Jake smiled. The first video hit TikTok before the sun even set. It started with a wide-angle shot of Bessie charging the buffet table in slow motion, wedding veil trailing behind her like a battle banner. Cut to a dramatic zoom on Karen screeching in the background, then a crisp transition to Dolly casually eating shrimp cocktail off a decorative ice sculpture. The caption: "When the bride's mom steals a farmer's yard, and the cows say nah fam, barnyard beatdown, Karen wedding fail." By midnight, it had 2.3 million views. By morning, it was featured on Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram Reels. By lunchtime, it had its own remix, complete with dubstep cow moos and Karen's infamous scream auto-tuned into the beat. Jake didn't have TikTok. He didn't even own a smart TV, but his niece Sarah did, and she was the one who barged in at 7 a.m., waving her phone like a trophy. "Uncle Jake, you're famous. Look, Bessie has a fan page. Someone started a GoFundMe to buy her a tiara." Jake rubbed his eyes and blinked at the screen. Sure enough, there was a high-res still of Bessie mid-trample, tongue out, eyes wild, with the caption, "Queen of the pasture, slayer of Karens." "Good Lord," Jake muttered, sipping his coffee. "I just wanted my fence fixed." Meanwhile, across town, Karen was getting roasted. Clips of her meltdown were now reaction memes. News stations had picked up the story under headlines like, "Wedding Gone Wrong. Farmer's Cows Crash Unauthorized Party. When Entitlement Meets Livestock. Bridezilla's Mom Sparks Mayhem in Backyard Debacle." Even Good Morning America ran a segment, complete with animated cows stomping over a cartoon wedding cake. Karen's phone rang nonstop, for interviews, for apologies, for refunds. Her inbox was a war zone of hate mail, memes, and one very official-looking email from a lawyer representing the wedding rental company. Turns out, someone still had to pay for the destroyed equipment. Spoiler, it wasn't going to be Jake. Jake watched it all unfold with a kind of mild amusement. He hadn't posted anything himself, didn't need to. The internet had already picked a side. And for once, it wasn't the one with a spray tan and superiority complex. He just sat back on his porch, sipping coffee while the cows grazed in peace. A truck pulled up around noon, an animal rescue van, oddly enough. Out stepped two college girls with clipboards and shirts that read #JusticeForBessie. "Are your cows available for a photo shoot?" One of them asked breathlessly. "We're doing a calendar to raise funds for local farmers. Your girls are icons." Jake scratched his chin. "Long as you don't mind cow poop, be my guest." Back at Karen's house, the story had flipped into a PR nightmare. Her real estate business had lost 3 clients. Madison blocked her on every platform. Her Facebook group, Bridal Brilliance with Karen, was flooded with moo emojis and cow memes. The worst part, she couldn't do a thing to stop it, because she'd said every word, trespassed every inch, and underestimated a man with a porch, a camera, and 6 very loyal cows. Jake scrolled through one of the many video compilations later that night. Bessie trampling the cake synced perfectly to dramatic opera music. He laughed once, low and deep. Reckon she won't try that again. In the background, Bessie let out a proud moo and lay down with a sigh. The undisputed queen of viral revenge. It was early evening when Karen made her last desperate attempt. Her phone had stopped ringing. Her email inbox had slowed to a trickle of hate mail, meme links, and a very irate complaint from a boutique catering service that had threatened to file a lawsuit. Everything she had built was in ruins, and no one cared. The entire town was laughing at her. Her Karen's weddings business. Ruined. Her daughter, Madison, out of the picture. And the cows. They were still living their best lives, gracefully trotting across the pasture like royalty. Bessie had started wearing a garland of daisies, courtesy of the Justice for Bessie movement, Jake, for all his quiet satisfaction, had managed to sit back and watch as the internet chewed up and spit out Karen's life. And the cows. They had become more famous than she could have ever imagined. But Karen wasn't done yet. Determined to restore some semblance of dignity, she rallied what little remained of her broken pride. She hired a PR firm, one of the best, ready to claw her way back to a version of normal. They advised her to release a statement, perhaps deny the entire thing. Say the footage was manipulated, that she had been victimized by a prank. But none of it mattered anymore. That night, Karen arrived on Jake's property, alone. Her car sat parked at the gate, its engine running as if she were steeling herself for battle. She had a plan, a final play. She grabbed her phone, checked her makeup in the rearview mirror, and marched toward the porch, heels clicking against the gravel with the sort of confidence she hadn't felt in days. "Jake," she called, her voice training to remain composed. Jake didn't get up from his chair. He didn't need to. He'd seen the same car, the same woman walking toward him before. But this time, something was different. The air between them was charged, taut with unspoken things. "What do you want now, Karen?" Jake's voice was low, steady. Karen took a breath, trying to summon the same controlled fury that had carried her through her life of privilege. "You need to take it down." Jake squinted at her. "Take what down?" "The video. The memes. All of it. It's destroying me." She was practically shaking. "It's all over the internet. I can't show my face in public anymore. You ruined me." Jake shook his head, slow and deliberate. "No, Karen, you ruined yourself." She was losing it now, hands shaking, face flushed. You don't understand. That was supposed to be the best day of my life, the day I showed the world that I'm important." Jake stood up slowly. "You might have wanted that, but what you needed was a little humility, a little respect for the land, maybe even a little respect for the cows." He turned his back on her, starting to walk toward the barn. But Karen didn't stop. Her next words were sharp, laced with venom. "I'll have you shut down. I'll tell the press you are a criminal. This farm will be gone, Jake. Gone." Jake paused. He didn't turn around. And that was when Bessie decided it was time for a final show-stopping move. With an impressive moo, Bessie, like the star she was, stormed out from behind the barn. She charged, hooves pounding the ground with such power that the very earth seemed to quake beneath her. In the blink of an eye, Bessie charged straight toward Karen, right past her. The force was enough to blow Karen off balance, sending her sprawling straight into the giant cow patty that had been left in the center of the yard. The world seemed to slow as Karen, eyes wide in horror, landed squarely in the middle of a steaming pile of manure. Bessie gave a satisfied moo, before turning around and trotting back to the pasture, as if nothing had happened. Jake couldn't help it. He turned and let out a loud, bellowing laugh. Karen, covered in the very essence of her humiliation, sat up, stunned, eyes darting from the pile of manure to Jake's amused face. "I think," Jake said, wiping tears from his eyes, "that's called a mood shift." The next day, the world finished what Karen had started. Viral memes flooded every corner of social media, and #BessieForPresident trended worldwide. Even Karen's best PR firm gave up on her, quietly resigning after realizing that no amount of damage control could undo a cow-themed PR disaster. As for Jake, well, he didn't mind the fame. He'd earned it fair and square. The cows got their well-deserved admiration, and Jake, he got the satisfaction of watching karma do its thing. The pasture stayed peaceful, with no more wedding hijackings, and as for Karen, she would never again underestimate the power of a farmer, a fence, and 6 very stubborn cows.